a country of 30 crore people with 21 crore economically viable people who are earning and spending, only 21 crore people, they had 120 crore credit cards. This is how the whole nation was transformed. And another, the sense of family was lost. The average number of persons per family in America in the year 1950 was 3.5. This figure came to 2.49 in 2011. Because of the reduction of this one person per household, they had to build 40 million more houses, which cost $12 trillion, and that was the improvement in their GDP. Destroy the families, GDP will go up, because that many number of scooters, that number of cars, that many number of washing machines, that many number of air conditioners. So atomizing the families into individuals promoted economic development. And something else happened. You know, 55% of the first marriages end in divorce in America. If somebody had some desire to marry, 67% of the second marriages end in divorce. If there is some desire left for the third marriage, 73% of the third marriages end in divorce. Only in 28% of the American families today, husband and wife live together with children. 26% of the American families, husband and wife live without children. Or not husband and wife, man and woman. 51% of the American families are headed by single parents, where the father and the mother do not live together, or there is no father at all. There is a book written by an American sociologist in the year 1998, A Fatherless America is Emerging. 41% of the babies born in America are born for unwed mothers, 21% of them are for school-going children. There are creches attached to schools in which school-going children deposit their children. The father of the children is not known. With the result, there is a huge dependence on the system, because there is no one to take care of the parents, elders, infirm people, unemployed people. There is no boy who is or girl who is above the age of 16 or 18 who lives with the parents. The parents say, why are you living with us? In the same way, the parents are not being taken care of by children. With the result, all these obligations have been saddled on to the government. Families have been nationalized. Government has been privatized. You know, it's a very peculiar economics. It has a sociology, it has a philosophy. There is no respect for parents, there is no respect for elders, there is no respect for teachers, there is no respect for women. Everybody has rights. Rights doesn't fetch you respect. Respect is something superior to rights. What happened? The family collapsed, society collapsed. Today, the social security obligations which are saddled on to the United States of America, if it is discounted to present value, it is estimated at $104 trillion, whereas America's GDP is only $16 trillion. You can understand, it is a time bomb ticking under America. 51% of the American families are dependent on the state. They have produced a state-dependent population. Now come to India. You know, one Kumar Bhattacharya, a Warwick University professor, a good friend of mine, we used to meet in corporate consultancy together. He is an advisor to TVS, and in that capacity we have moved with each other. And there was a debate between me and him in 1999 or 2000 in Delhi, where he said, Guru, you should not be opposing privatization. I mean, privatization is very necessary. Why should the government run railways? Why should it run BHEL? Why should it run airways? You know, these are all things which can be done by ordinary people. Why should you do this? This burden should be given up by the government. This was his whole presentation. And some officials of the government of India were also there when we were having a debate. I said, Kumar, I agree that we should not carry on business in government, but I will tell you, the Indian Railway carries the whole of Australia every day. Many people do not know it. The number of people it transports every day from one place to another is 2.3 crores. Australian population is only 2.29 crores. It is impossible for any other ownership to run this except government. It cannot be done by contracts. What the Indian Railways is doing is an astounding feat. We don't know it. The postal system, in spite of all the couriers, this year it has delivered 660 crore postcards, 50 pies. Nowhere in the world you have such postal system. So efficient. In the money order, there has not been till today a fraud. 151,000 post offices. They have collected 5.5 lakh crores as small savings. We don't know. So I told him that there are certain things which cannot be privatized. There are certain things like running hotels or running bus transport. These are all not the functions of the government. But Kumar, I am going to ask you a question for which I want an answer from you. You say these are all the burden of the government, the burden of the people which the government should not carry. It is the corporates, it is the private businessmen who can carry all these burden. What is the biggest public burden of the government in the West? Say in America. He said social security. Social security means taking care of parents, elders, infirm people, unemployed people. In the year 1990, when Bill Clinton came to power, he appointed his wife as the chairman of a committee for privatizing health security and generally social security. She submitted a report that it must be privatized, but it cannot be privatized. Because this privatization cannot be handed over to corporates. Families are needed for this. You have destroyed families. You cannot create families by law. You cannot create families by government order. Families are an evolution of culture. Even in courts, has anybody come to file a suit for marriage? Or people have come to court only for dissolution of marriage? Has anybody come to file a suit, sir, we want to live as one family, please order us to live as one family? Or they have come to you only for partition? Law can do only division. It can never unite. This is the function of the society. It is the function of culture. It is the function of the spiritual orientation in people. All that law promotes rights, which has to be curtailed to promote culture. The moment you insist on right, the culture is gone. The moment you insist on rights, respect for parents, respect for elders, respect for teachers is gone. And I told him, in India, the entire social security burden is privatized, not by any government law. It is the way we live. It is our culture. It is our tradition. You call it aram, you call it dharma. 60 crore people are dependent on the rest of the population for the day-to-day sustenance, for food, for health, for taking care. He told me, Guru, if this one point is articulated by the Indian economists, Indian policy makers, Indian media, the balance sheet of the government of India will be more bankable than the balance sheet of any country in the world, because no country carries this light a burden and the society undertakes this burden. This is not something which is taught in the schools of economics, but these are facts. And now come to what happened in pure. Now I have tried to give a social, spiritual, cultural orientation to economics. Now I am going to get into the real facts. Between 1991 and 2011, you have seen this huge growth of IT sector, there is auto revolution. Now you look at what is the map of the Indian economy. Only 15% of our GDP comes from the corporates, both listed and unlisted. 5% from listed corporates and only 1% from Sensex corporates, which 25,000 Sensex rise. India is a global power. All these 30 Sensex companies put together contributes to only 1% of India's GDP. The entire BSE 500 contributes to only 5% of India's GDP. The entire corporate sector contributes only 15% of India's GDP. 17% comes from agriculture. 23% comes from government. The balance comes from what is known as the non-corporate sector. Now I will tell you the astounding figures. Between 1991 and 2011, the corporate sector got $477 billion, equal to almost 28 lakh crores, as foreign direct investment, FAI investment, foreign loans. $477 billion. 20 lakh crores was the additional credit which the banking system gave to them. 48 lakh crores was the money which they received between 1991 and 2011. You know what was the addition to the employment given by the corporate sector? When I made a presentation to the officials of the central government in the month of June, they were stunned. With 48 lakhs crores of rupees, the additional employment public and private sector corporates gave was just 2.2 million. The policymakers were stunned. I said it's not a secret. You look at Annexure 56 and 57 of the economic survey that tells you private sector added 3.5 million employment in this 20-year period, 3.7 million employment. Public sector dropped 1.5 million, the net was 2.2 million. Then who employed India? The economic census of 2010 said there are 57.7 million non-farming enterprises which employed 115 million people. The construction sector employed 270 million people. These two provided the employment. These two kept the country without anarchy. They kept the social order. They kept the Indian economy going, families going. You know what is the amount of bank advances to this sector? Just 4% of their requirements. When I made this presentation, the Prime Minister was stunned. The result was paragraph 1 or 2 in the budget speech of the Finance Minister. Nobody has read it. The media did not read it. The media is more keen about what is the tax advantage to the middle class. There is no economic discourse in India. The para 1 or 2 said it is this sector. 64% of this sector is operated by backward class, scheduled tribes and scheduled caste. And just 4% of their requirements they get from the banking system. The banking system is incapable of financing it. Their training, their HR model, the restrictions on them from the Reserve Bank, the Basel international norms, that will enable them to fund only corporates. Whereas India is run by non-corporates. So the government has devised a policy that they will create a separate financial architecture for funding these non-corporate enterprises, which alone drive the Indian economy. You will be stunned when I asked the former Economic Affairs Secretary to the Government of India, a good friend of mine, why didn't you tell your ministers, your prime ministers, your finance ministers? He is a common friend of Mr. Shankar Narayan and me. He told me, Guru, if I tell this, I have also to tell them what kind of policies to promote. The present economics does not permit any policy making for this. Can you believe the economics that we are operating has nothing to do with India? In fact, when Mr. Kamalanathan asked me, sir, we are inviting you in October, we wanted to invite you on October 2nd, because for our convenience, we made it October 6th. And of course, for somebody else's convenience, it had to be 8th October. And he said, sir, I want you to speak on Gandhiji. I said, nobody will come if I speak on Gandhiji. But I will yet end with Gandhiji. The only man who understood India was Mahatma Gandhi. The only man who understood this country was Mahatma Gandhi. I don't accept everything that he did. I am a critic of Gandhi. You see, we don't idolize, but we understand the man's depth, the man's anguish, the man's experience. He was the only one who said the Western civilization will not work in India, and therefore the Western economics will not work in India. You know what is the amount of money that America is borrowing every year? $3.5 trillion. If they don't borrow this money from the rest of the world, they cannot pay salary to the United States of America, president and vice president. They are borrowing 75% of the world's savings. Asia is generating 75% of the world's savings. Family-based societies save. Individualist societies, where families are destroyed, they only spend. And it is the spending type of economics that is being marketed, that is being forced, that is being legislated, that is being spread. Have you ever seen an advertisement of a family in which you will have grandparents, parents, grandchildren? No. It will always be just husband, wife, one child. The concept is family means only this. If there are only 2.5 persons per family, India will require another 12 crore houses. You will collapse. Where is the teaching of economics like this in our economic schools? In fact, family savings drives India. Without family savings, it would have been finished. Between 1991 and 2011, India, the capital generated in India, 98.8% was by domestic savings. Only 1.2% came by way of foreign investment. 1.2%. This is what Shankaracharya, the former advisor to the government of India, wrote. That is stunning that India has been able to generate so much savings that foreign investment was really not needed for India. Afterwards came global paper number 187 of Goldman Sachs, which said, we first thought India needs $400 billion for infrastructure. Then the figure was revised to $1.2 trillion. In 2010, it was revised to $1.7 trillion. Then the question came, who will fund this? Goldman Sachs came out with its report, global paper number 187. It's an American, one of the most leading investment and commercial banks in the world. They came with this report and said that no country can help India to build this kind of infrastructure. Nobody has this kind of money to invest. But India generates enough savings through their families. You know, our savings to GDP ratio is likely to touch 40% by 2016. Our cash savings from 2016, according to 2015, according to Goldman Sachs, will be $800 billion per annum. What is $800 billion? That is the total of all the bank advances today. That will be the annual accretion to savings, thanks to families. You take one economics textbook and show me the word family. You know, the economics we study, the economics we discuss, is the economics of the English educated people of India, who neither understand America nor understand India. I have been 20 years back when I used to talk like this, I used to be called a Neanderthal economist. I am an economist of Neanderthal times. But nobody challenges me today. You know why? After 2008, the Western economic system has been questioned in the West itself. The Economist magazine came out with the front page cover story. It is not economic crisis, it is economics in crisis. You know, these economic laws have destroyed families, destroyed relationships. It is produced a contract-based society. We are a relation-based society. Relationship govern all of us. And there is no economic theory suited to relationship. I will just take you to Japan and conclude my speech. Japan was supposed to overtake America in the year 1990. There was a book written by one Thoreau, who said head to head. In that he said by mid or late 1990s, Japan will overtake America. But Japan collapsed in 1991 because it had put its surplus monies in America, and America devalued the dollars, and all the monies that Japan invested went up in smoke. That is likely to happen to China also, because China has worked and sweated but put all the money in America, and America has not invested this money. That has gone into the drain of America as consumption. America has no money to return. It is printing money. It has printed from 2009 $3.5 trillion. Europe has printed $1.2 trillion. So when Japan collapsed in 1991, the American economists, the IMF, World Bank said, your economy has collapsed only because you have not promoted your domestic consumption. You must ask your people to spend. The Japanese people were not spending. They are like us. So they said you must cut down the interest rates. So the interest rate was cut down from 7 to 6%. The Japanese did not spend. 6 to 5%, they didn't spend. 5 to 4%, they didn't spend. 4 to 3, no. 3 to 2, no. 2 to 1, no. In 2001, the government said nil rate of interest. Even then, they didn't spend. And in 2002, the Japanese government said, if you want us to keep your money for 12 months, you have to give us your money to keep your money. Even then, they didn't spend. You know why? It is a family-based society. Have you ever seen an economist making a distinction between a family-based society and individualist society? It is only in individualist societies economics is a universal law. Why I am mentioning this is our impulses are as family men, as cultured people, as related people, functioning on relation. We have a community obligation. A classmate from your village will come and say, I am getting my daughter married, I want 20,000, you have to help me. You can never say no. In America, you can never meet your classmate or anyone. You are a stranger. Your father is a stranger. Your brother is a stranger. These are economic realities in this country. No economist has been able to answer these questions because their subject has nothing to do with India. We are intelligent people. We don't require economic laws to understand all this. Nobody's money belongs to himself in this country alone. It is shared by the family, near and dear. I will tell you two stories and complete my speech, because having spoken in such a and give the money to all these poor people who come there. The income tax department was stunned. This came in Times of India. You can't believe. I'll tell you another story. In Bhopal, this came in India today, the tidbit news. A thief was caught, a pickpocket. So, are you admitting to your crime? Is what the judge asked. Yes, sir, I admit to crime. Pickpocket, you pickpocket, that's your crime. No, sir, that's my profession. Then what is your crime? Sir, I will tell you, you may not accept me, but I am saying, when I started this profession, 25% of my earnings, I said, I will give it to Lord Balaji. So that was about 10 rupees a day, so I was giving 2.5, no problem. but the turnover has gone up to 5,000 rupees a day. Why should I share 25% with a sleeping partner? Sir, only yesterday I reduced it to 20 rupees and I am caught today. A very peculiar country. You can never understand this country. Only one man understood this country. He was Gandhi. The English educated persons. The English educated persons can never understand Gandhi unless they stop reading English books and start reading Ramayanam and start reading Tirukkural and start reading things which are local. Then you understand, establish contact with people. You will come back to your roots. Then your intellectualism will take a U-turn for you to understand what this country is, what its economy is, what are its economic impulses, and how the Western architecture is failing in the West. From being the most prosperous nation and as a banker of the world in 1976, America has become the most borrowed nation in the world. Their borrowing is private, government borrowing is 110% of the GDP. Their total borrowing is $60 trillion. The American companies are borrowing, banks are borrowing, families are borrowing, government is borrowing. You know why? Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati's advice, based on American experience. Sirhakatti Perihawal. This is what Avayar told us. Unless we go back to our roots, even your economic development is not safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We are really proud of you, sir. Thank you so much.
My Lord, Honorable Justice V. Ramasubramaniam, the Chief Guest, Mr. S. Gurumurthy, the Chartered Accountant, Commentator on Economic Affairs, Visiting Faculty, IIT Bombay, respected Senior Advocates, distinguished members of the Bar. We express our sincere thanks to our Lordship, Justice Rajendran, for graciously accepting our invitation and delivering the welcome address. We thank Sri S. Gurumurthy for delivering the lecture and enlightening about the Indian economy, Indian impulses and Western ideas. Particularly, the comparative economic study is very informative and useful to our members. Give me a big hand to our hero of the day. We thank the Honorable Justice V. Ramasubramaniam for attending this lecture and grace this occasion. We would like to thank all the respected senior advocates, members of the bar for attending this series. We once again thank one and all. Thank you.